Welcome to the federal compliance updates for June and July. We have two main stories out of June and July for the federal region, and I do have a few articles and resources that we are going to dive into. So first, let's take a look at the COA Act, was introduced into the U.S. Senate, and this article is by Vicente Cederberg. So, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, COA Act, was finally introduced in the U.S. Senate today by Senator Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Ron Wyden. This comprehensive legislation would end the federal government's decades-long war on cannabis, regulate and tax cannabis at the federal level, and preserve states' rights to determine their own cannabis laws, similar to the way alcohol is regulated. It also includes restorative measures aimed at repairing damage caused by the war on drugs and ensuring those who are most affected by cannabis prohibition can benefit from legalization. Attorneys at Vicente Cederberg are closely reviewing the final draft of the bill and will be publishing a detailed summary on the VS Insights blog. If you have questions about the COA Act and other recent federal developments could impact your business, please contact Vicente Cederberg. All right, and to unpack this a little bit farther, here is an article out of Marijuana Moment. Senate bill to federally legalize marijuana and promote social equity finally filed by Schumer, Booker, and Wyden. A much anticipated U.S. Senate bill to federally legalize marijuana and promote social equity has finally been introduced, just over a year after first unveiling a draft version of the cannabis reform legislation. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senate Finance Committee Chair Ron Wyden, and Senator Cory Booker finally filed the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act in the middle of July. The news of an imminent release starting circulating in last week, so the first week of July. The final bill incorporates significant feedback received from more than 1,800 comments that were submitted following the draft's release. But with ongoing talks about reaching a passable compromise this Congress, it's also possible that certain provisions attached to the new lengthy legislation would serve as building blocks for something else, a more incremental reform package that Schumer has been discussing with bipartisan offices in both chambers. In any case, the main thrust of the now filed 296-page legalization bill closely resembles that of an earlier version, which weighed in at a mere 163 pages, through the senators' highlighted number of changes which generally expand on the draft. For example, there are revisions concerning cannabis industry workers' rights, a federal responsibility to set an impaired driving standard, banking access, expungement, and penalties for possessing or distributing large quantities of cannabis without a federal permit. The bill would also create a new federal definition for hemp that would increase the permissible THC by dry weight to 0.7% from the current 0.3%, but also make it so all THC isomers would be included in that total, not just the Delta 9 THC. I also want to bring to your attention this really awesome art summary. So this is the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, and it's a detailed summary, and it just goes through all the high-level things in this 296 page of legislation, and there's a nice little table of contents here too. So definitely take a look at this. Something that stuck out to me in here is talking about the track and trace framework. So specifically, I've had a lot of conversations about federal track and trace and if that's truly going to be implemented with a lot of seed to sale third-party systems that are implemented into like metric leaf data systems and BioTrack. And the thought process here is that a lot of these third-party systems think that there will not be a federal track and trace, which I actually find to be pretty absurd. The fact that in this bill, they're already going to have penalties for people possessing or distributing large quantities of cannabis. They want to track the taxes. They want to make sure that they are being distributed appropriately and not going over purchase limits and things like that. I absolutely think that there will be a track and trace. And so specifically in the legislation, there's section 112 subsection B of the discussion draft would direct the Secretary of the Treasury to establish a federal track and trace regime for cannabis products to prevent diversion as well as federal and state tax evasion. The provision would require manufacturers of cannabis products to place identifiable codes, designs, or devices on the label of cannabis products to monitor movements of such products between the point of production and sale. The provision would require certain cannabis enterprises other than retailers to maintain records related to cannabis transactions, which would be available for inspection by federal and state agencies. The provisions also requires any manufacturer or distributor of cannabis products to notify the Attorney General if they have knowledge of diversion or tax evasion. So I think there will be a federal track and trace. In my opinion, Metric is also primed to be that. I want to say that they are now in 22 states out of, I want to say like the 35 or 37 that are legalized. So Metric's really priming themselves to be that federal track and trace system. And I think there will be a system. So all of you third-party systems out there thinking that there won't be, mark my words, there will be. All right, moving on to the next one. And then our last update. So again, out of marijuana moment, federal marijuana records would be expunged under a new bipartisan congressional bill. Bipartisan House lawmakers filed a bill on the last Friday in July that would create a process to expunge federal misdemeanor marijuana convictions and allow courts to recommend presidential pardons for eligible cases. Reps Troy Carter and Rodney Davis are sponsoring the new Marijuana Misdemeanor Expungement Act, which would require the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court to implement rules to facilitate the, quote, review, expungement, sealing, sequester, and redaction, end quote, of criminal records for low-level federal cannabis crimes. The bill lays out specific criminal codes that would constitute an expungement event. That includes current statutes criminalizing possession and distribution of small amounts of cannabis without remuneration, as well as any other federal misdemeanor, petty offense, infraction, or civil penalty involving cannabis, including cannabis-related drug paraphernalia that didn't involve violence or threats of violence. In order to be eligible for expungement under the proposal, at least 1 year must have transpired since the arrest or the last non-technical docket filing. Courts could only process the relief if they haven't been notified by federal authorities that the given case is ongoing or that the person involved has evaded prosecution. That is super exciting. Awesome. And those are the federal updates for June and July.